I sat at the Grand Oak conference table, my laptop open in front of me, taking notes as I had at every annual meeting for the past decade. My father, Daniel Harrington, presided at the head of the table, his perfectly tailored suit exuding authority, his salt and pepper hair in its usual immaculate style. My brother Ethan lounged in his chair, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, clearly uninterested in the proceedings. And now, my father's deep voice rang out, "We need to discuss the future leadership of Harrington Enterprises." He let the words hang in the air, his gaze intentionally drifting past me to rest on Ethan. As you all know, I'm nearing retirement. I kept my expression neutral, my fingers tapping away at my laptop despite the cold rush creeping through my veins. I'd heard this speech countless times before, each version more predictable than the last. "My daughter Isla," he said dismissively, gesturing toward me, despite her enthusiasm, "clearly lacks the necessary business sense to lead this company. Too soft, too idealistic. She's more concerned with charity work than bottom lines." The room shifted uneasily. The board members had witnessed my father's critiques over the years, his ruthless dismantling of every achievement I'd ever earned. My master's degree from Wharton. She only passed because of networking. My successful overhaul of our struggling European division. It was a fluke. My proposal to restructure our marketing strategy that saved millions? I'm sure she copied it from a consultant. Ethan smirked, finally looking up from his phone. "Face it, Dad," he laughed. "Isla's just here to take notes and organize lunch. That's all she's good for." The board members chuckled politely, but I noticed a few subtle glances in my direction. They had seen my work firsthand, knew I was capable, but none of them would dare challenge Ethan or my father's favorites. "You're right," I replied softly, shutting my laptop. "I'm just here to take notes." My father's smug smile faltered when I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "I'm also here," I said coolly, "as the majority shareholder of Harrington Enterprises." The room fell silent. Ethan's eyes widened in shock. My father's face drained of color. "What kind of nonsense is this?" he demanded, his voice growing sharper. I methodically distributed the documents to each board member, my hands steady despite the pounding in my chest. "6 months ago, when you were busy handling Ethan's public scandal, our stock dropped dramatically. Do you recall why, Father?" He said nothing, but I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. "It happened right after Ethan's arrest for assault, the one you paid to keep under wraps. Our stock plummeted 40% overnight. That's when I began acquiring shares quietly through a third party. By the time you were scrambling to fix Ethan's image, you never even realized who was buying up the stock." Ethan sprang forward, reaching for the papers, but I pulled them out of his grasp. "This is impossible," he yelled. "Dad, tell her she's lying." But my father was staring down at the documents, his face a shade of gray I had never seen before. He could see it, the signatures, the legal verifications, irrefutable proof that I now controlled 51% of Harrington Enterprises. "How?" he whispered. "How did you manage this?" I let a small smile tug at the corners of my lips. "Remember Aunt Claire's inheritance? The one you told me was too risky to handle. I didn't listen to your advice, Father. I invested it. Wisely." The board members murmured amongst themselves as they processed the implications of what I had done. I could feel their opinions shifting as they realized what was unfolding. "This is insane," Ethan yelled, standing up so suddenly his chair toppled backward. "I'm the rightful heir to this company, not some naive girl woe." "Mr. Harrington," our legal counsel, Olivia Morgan, interjected, her voice calm yet firm. "I've reviewed the documents. They are entirely legitimate. Your sister is now the majority shareholder of Harrington Enterprises." I reopened my laptop, revealing not meeting notes, but a polished presentation. "Now that we've cleared up the ownership issue, let's talk about the future of the company, starting with the excessive bonuses and the reckless spending by some of our executives." Ethan sank back into his chair, his face as pale as ash. My father gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles whitening. "You think you can do this?" he growled. "I built this company from the ground up." "Yes, you did," I agreed, "and then you nearly destroyed it trying to shield Ethan from the consequences of his actions. The Montgomery account we lost last year, that was because he showed up to the pitch drunk. The Parker lawsuit, that was due to his inappropriate behavior with an employee. The European division crisis, It was his lack of oversight that caused it before I stepped in to fix things. I addressed the board directly. I compiled a full analysis of the company's performance over the last 5 years. I believe you'll find it quite enlightening. For the next 2 hours, I laid out the evidence, Ethan's failures, the money my father had funneled out of the company to keep scandals under wraps, the legal risks we were facing if changes weren't implemented immediately. I presented a clear, structured plan for turning the company around while maintaining our competitive edge. The board listened attentively, asking insightful questions, engaging with my ideas in a way they never had with my father's or Ethan's proposals. I could see respect building in their eyes as I demonstrated not only my knowledge, but my vision for the future. Throughout it all, my father remained silent, his face growing more stormy with each passing minute. Ethan alternated between texting frantically, likely trying to bribe lawyers, and glaring at me with open hatred. When I concluded, the board voted unanimously to approve my proposals. This included removing Ethan from his executive position and significantly curtailing my father's direct involvement in the company's daily operations. As the meeting adjourned, my father finally broke his silence. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Using my own methods against me." I packed my things calmly. "No, father. I used my own methods. You taught me that women are too emotional to succeed, so I removed emotion from the equation. You taught me that power is everything, so I gained it. You taught me that loyalty doesn't matter in business, so I stopped letting family blind me to what's right." "I'll take you to court," Ethan spat, waving his phone. "My lawyers." "Your lawyers will tell you to comply," I interrupted. "Unless you want me to release the full documentation on your past indiscretions." "I've been taking notes for years, Ethan. Very thorough notes." I stood smoothing my skirt as I prepared to leave. "You have until the end of the day to vacate your office. Security will escort you out. Father, you'll find a revised contract on your desk. I suggest you read it carefully before deciding whether to contest my decisions." As I turned toward the door, my father called after me, "You'll regret this, Isla. You don't understand how hard it is to run a company this large." I paused, allowing a small smile to cross my lips. "Actually, father, I've been running it for the past 3 years, ever since you entrusted me with a European division. You just didn't bother to check the reports closely enough to see my strategies turning everything around. But don't worry, I'll keep taking notes at future meetings. It's what I'm best at." The door clicked shut behind me, leaving them to stew in their own arrogance. Outside, my assistant Emily was waiting with a stack of documents needing my signature. "Everything went according to plan?" she asked, a knowing smile on her face. "Exactly as planned," I confirmed. "Schedule a meeting with the entire company for tomorrow. It's time for a new chapter." The next morning, I arrived at the office early, before the sun had fully risen over the city skyline. As I walked through the quiet halls of Stewart Industries, my heels clicking against the marble floors, I couldn't help but smile at the nameplates being changed on the executive offices. Sarah Stewart, Chief Executive Officer, now adorned the main office door, replacing my father's name of 30 years. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since yesterday's coup. Family members, business associates, and journalists all wanted to know how the coffee girl had orchestrated such a takeover. I'd ignored most of them, but one message from my Aunt Catherine caught my attention. "Your mother would be so proud. Show them what the Stewart women are really made of." The company-wide meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the main conference center. By 8:30, employees were already filing in, the air thick with anticipation and whispered conversations. I watched from my office as the room filled, noting the mix of anxiety and excitement on their faces. At precisely 9 a.m., I stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady. "As you've probably heard, there have been some significant changes in leadership at Stewart Industries. I want to be transparent about what this means for all of you." For the next hour, I outlined my vision for the company's future. No more covering up scandals with company money. No more promoting based on family connections rather than merit. No more toxic workplace culture that protected harassers and punished whistleblowers. "Every single person in this room has value," I declared. "Your ideas matter. Your work matters. And under my leadership, your contributions will be recognized and rewarded based on merit alone." The applause that followed was tentative at first, then grew stronger. I saw hope in the eyes of employees who'd been overlooked for years, determination in the faces of those who'd been afraid to speak up. As I left the stage, my assistant Hannah rushed up to me. "Your brother's wife is in your office," she whispered. "She's threatening to call the police if we try to remove her." I sighed. Let's get this over with. Jessica was pacing my office, her designer heels leaving scuff marks on the floor. She spun around as I entered, her perfectly made-up face contorted with rage. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "Do you have any idea what you've done to us? James is devastated. Your father had to be sedated. The country club is already gossiping about how we've lost everything." I sat down at my desk, deliberately taking my time to arrange my papers. Lost everything. James still owns his shares in the company. Father still has his position, albeit with reduced authority. The only thing that's changed is that they can't keep mismanaging this company for their own benefit. Mismanaging? She laughed hysterically. James worked his entire life for this company. He deserves. James has never worked a day in his life. I cut her off. Let me show you something. I pulled up the company's financial records on my computer screen, turning it so she could see. These are the losses from projects James managed in the past 5 years. This red line shows the money father spent covering up his mistakes. And this, I pulled up another document, is the report from HR documenting every complaint filed against him for harassment, discrimination, and creating a hostile work environment. Jessica's face paled as she scanned the numbers. But he said those women were lying. He said they were just jealous. They weren't lying, Jessica, and deep down you know that. How many times have you had to apologize for his behavior at company events? How many times have you made excuses for him coming to work drunk or high? How many times have you watched him humiliate employees just because he could? She sank into a chair, her shoulders slumping. What am I supposed to do now? We just bought a new house. I have the charity gala coming up. That's not my problem, I replied calmly. But if you're worried about money, I suggest you look closely at your prenuptial agreement, specifically the clause about infidelity. Her head snapped up. What are you talking about? I slid a folder across the desk. More notes I've been taking. Your husband isn't as discreet as he thinks he is, especially not with his assistant Jennifer. As Jessica flipped through the photos and hotel receipts, her face crumbled. Without another word, she grabbed her designer purse and fled the office, mascara streaming down her cheeks. I barely had time to breathe before my phone rang, my father's lawyer. "Miss Stewart, your father wishes to contest the stock purchase. He claims you used insider information." "Mr. Patterson," I interrupted, "before you continue, you should know that I have documentation of every questionable financial decision my father has made in the past decade, including the money he diverted from the company to his personal accounts, the false expenses he filed, and the bribes he paid to keep James's scandals quiet. Would he like to open that can of worms in court?" Silence on the other end. "Then, I'll advise him against legal action." Wise choice. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of changes. I restructured the executive team, promoting people who'd been overlooked due to my father's prejudices. Maria Chen, who'd been brilliant in middle management despite James's constant harassment, became our new COO. David Thompson, whose innovative proposals had been repeatedly shot down by my father, took over as head of development. The company culture shifted almost overnight. Without James's toxic presence and my father's outdated policies, people began to thrive. Ideas flowed freely in meetings, productivity increased, employee satisfaction scores rose dramatically. 3 months after the takeover, our stock price had increased by 40%. That's when the family started crawling back. First came the cousins, suddenly remembering all the times they'd supported me. Then the aunts and uncles, claiming they'd always known I had potential. My father's sister Linda, who'd once told me I should focus on finding a husband instead of a career, now wanted to know if her son could intern at the company. I declined them all politely but firmly. James tried a different approach. He showed up at my apartment one night, drunk and belligerent. "You think you're so smart," he slurred, swaying in my doorway. "But you're still just Dad's disappointing daughter. You'll never be a real businessman." "Businesswoman," I corrected him. "And I'm not the one who lost their job, their wife, and their reputation in a single day. How is Jessica, by the way? I heard she's quite happy with her divorce settlement." He lunged at me, but I'd anticipated this. My security team, which I quietly hired after the takeover, appeared instantly, restraining him. Add attempted assault to the restraining order. I told my lawyer the next day. 6 months after the takeover, Forbes magazine requested an interview. They wanted to feature me in their 40 Under 40 issue. The photographer suggested taking the photo in the company boardroom, the same room where my father and brother had humiliated me for years. As I sat in my father's old chair, now mine, the photographer asked me to share the secret to my success. Patience, I replied, and very good note-taking skills. The article came out a month later. I had it framed and sent copies to my father and James, along with their quarterly dividend statements showing how much money they'd made thanks to my leadership. 1 year after the takeover, I hosted a gala celebrating Stewart Industries' most successful year in its history. The event was covered by all major business publications. I gave a speech about innovation, integrity, and the importance of recognizing talent regardless of gender or background. My father attended, though he hadn't been invited. He looked older, smaller somehow. He approached me after my speech, a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. "You've done well," he admitted grudgingly. "Better than I expected." "I know," I replied. "I've always done better than you expected. You just never bothered to notice." He flinched. "Sarah, I may have been wrong about some things." "Some things?" I raised an eyebrow. "Many things," he amended. "I don't suppose, is there any chance we could start over? As a family?" I studied him for a moment, remembering all the years of dismissal, of cruel comments, of being told I wasn't good enough. Then I thought of my mother, who taught me that true strength isn't about revenge. It's about rising above those who try to keep you down. "We can't start over," I said finally. "But if you're willing to acknowledge your mistakes and make real changes, we might be able to move forward. As business associates first, family, we'll see." He nodded slowly, understanding that this was more than he deserved but less than he'd hoped for. The next board meeting was held in the same room where everything had changed a year ago. But this time, when I sat at the head of the table, no one questioned my right to be there. When I spoke, everyone listened. My assistant brought in coffee before the meeting started, premium roast served in fine china cups. I caught my father watching as I poured my own cup. "You know," I said conversationally, "it turns out I'm actually terrible at serving coffee, but I'm excellent at running a Fortune 500 company. Funny how life works out, isn't it?" The board members chuckled. Even my father managed a small smile. I opened my laptop, the same one I used to take all those careful notes over the years. But now, instead of recording their dismissive comments and cruel jokes, I was presenting our latest quarterly results, our expansion plans, our rising stock prices. The company was thriving. Our employees were happy. Our innovations were making headlines. And the quiet girl they'd underestimated for so long was leading it all. Sometimes, when I work late in my office, I look at that old graduation photo and think about how far I've come. My mother's words still ring true. The best revenge isn't about destroying others. It's about becoming everything they said you couldn't be. And I've become so much more than they ever imagined possible.